Welcome, guys, to another midnight story. But tonight is not like the others. You shouldn't have come here. The shadows are watching your every step. The wind whispers secrets you were never meant to hear. Every creak, every rustle could be your last dot. Do you feel it? The darkness moving just behind you. Welcome to the Midnight Story.
7 Disturbing True Cave Horror Stories from the Blue Ridge. Horror Stories Story 1. Echoes in the Forgotten Cavern. I remember the first time I stepped into that old cave along the Blue Ridge. It was late afternoon, and the sunlight was already thinning through the pines when I found the entrance tucked behind a cluster of rocks and overgrown roots. I'd heard rumors about it for years. Locals spoke in hushed tones about people wandering in and never returning, but I was curious, maybe reckless. The air as I ducked under the low arch of stone was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of wet rock and something else I couldn't name, something tangy, metallic, almost like old iron rusted in water. I took a deep breath and pressed forward, flashlight flickering against the damp walls. At first, I thought the echoes I heard were just my own movements, the scrape of boots on stone, the patter of small water droplets, but soon I realized they didn't match me. Soft whispers drifted from deeper inside, barely audible, like someone murmuring secrets to themselves. My stomach tightened. I tried calling out, a nervous laugh spilling from my throat. But the sound came back distorted, twisted in a way that made my skin crawl, as though the cave itself had rearranged my voice. I froze, listening, every nerve straining, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to move around me, sometimes to my right, sometimes behind, always just beyond the reach of the light. I pushed forward anyway, compelled by a strange, instinctive curiosity I couldn't explain. The further I went, the narrower the tunnel became, and every turn made it feel as if the cave stretched impossibly longer than it should. Shadows moved along the walls, slow and deliberate, crawling across jagged surfaces in ways that didn't line up with anything around them. I'd whip the flashlight around, heart pounding, only to see nothing but blank rock. Every step pressed me deeper into that unnatural quiet, the air heavier now, pressing against my chest like the weight of water. My palms were slick with sweat, my fingers trembling around the flashlight. Somewhere up ahead, a soft clatter echoed, like someone dropping pebbles, but I was alone. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bat, but the sound carried a rhythm, deliberate and unnerving. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Hours may have passed. I lost track of time. The cave seemed alive, almost breathing around me, each exhalation of wind carrying whispers that twisted and mocked me. I tried to turn back, to retrace my steps, but the tunnel didn't cooperate. Corners I had passed before now twisted differently. Passages stretched out impossibly long, and I felt like a mouse trapped in a labyrinth built by some unseen mind. Panic rose, crawling up my throat, but something compelled me to move deeper, toward a dim glow at the far end that I wasn't sure I had seen before. My legs ached. My lungs burned and my hands scraped on the jagged stone as I steadied myself along the walls. The whispering followed, murmurs of words I couldn't understand, only sense, intent, observation, something cold and watchful. I began to feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't stop. I felt drawn, almost possessed by some part of the cave I didn't want to admit existed. At one point, I stopped to rest, crouching behind a low stone formation, chest heaving. The whispers quieted for a moment, then returned, layered, closer, surrounding me. I wanted to scream, to shake it off as imagination, but it felt so real. Too real. Then I thought I saw a figure at the far end of the tunnel, just beyond the faint reach of my flashlight. It was humanoid, tall, still, and staring straight at me. I froze, staring back, heart hammering against my ribs. The figure didn't move, but it felt alive, intelligent. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished, leaving nothing but the oppressive dark. My breath caught, and the whispers rose again, louder now, more insistent, almost angry. I stumbled backward, scraping my hands and knees on the rock, flashlight swinging wildly, but the cave seemed endless, twisting and folding like it had grown around me. I was disoriented, exhausted, and terrified. Yet somehow I forced myself onward, guided by the vague instinct that if I stopped, the darkness would consume me entirely. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I found myself back at the entrance, or at least, what I thought was the entrance. Sunlight broke through the pines and I fell forward onto the forest floor, lungs burning, body trembling. My hands were scraped and raw, my clothes torn, my shoes muddy. I lay there, staring at the sky through the branches, heartbeat pounding in my ears. The whispers had stopped, but the weight of the cave remained in my chest, pressing down even in the open air. I glanced back, half expecting to see the figure watching from the shadows, but the entrance was empty. I didn't speak of it for days, not even to friends who would have laughed me off, not until the memory settled into a dull ache that haunted every night. Even now, when I pass the foot of the Blue Ridge, I feel the pull of that cave, a tug in my chest, a quiet reminder that something waits in the dark. Something that sees, that listens, that follows. I can still feel its gaze on me when I close my eyes, every whispered echo twisting in my mind, reminding me that the mountain keeps its secrets, and some of them reach out to you long after you've left. I've never gone back, and I never will, but the memory remains vivid, alive, watching, waiting. Even now I wonder if I really escaped, or if a part of me is still down there, somewhere in the cold, unending dark, answering whispers I can no longer name. Story 2: Shadows Beneath the Ridge. I never should have gone into that tunnel. I'd heard the warnings from locals along the Blue Ridge. People whispered about it in town like it was cursed, said those who ventured in sometimes never came out. I laughed it off at first, convinced it was just old tales meant to scare tourists and kids like me. But the day I found it, hidden behind a thicket of rhododendron and brambles, I felt a flicker of unease I couldn't shake. The entrance was small, almost swallowed by the hillside, like it had been waiting for someone to push past the roots and stones and step inside. I hesitated for a moment, breathing in the heavy, damp air that smelled faintly of soil and something older, something I couldn't name. My curiosity won. I pressed forward, flashlight in hand, and immediately the temperature dropped sharply, cold enough to make my skin prickle and the hairs on my arms rise. The walls were slick with moisture, each step echoing faintly. But then I noticed it. Shadows along the stone, moving in ways that didn't match the sway of my light. At first I thought it was my imagination, tired eyes playing tricks in the gloom, but the shapes shifted with purpose. They slithered across the rock like smoke caught on an unseen current, deliberate, observing. A low scraping sound followed me as I moved, soft and persistent like claws dragging along stone. I stopped, straining to hear, heart hammering. It didn't stop. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was nothing, probably animals, rats or raccoons. But the sound was too measured, too rhythmic, and it didn't scatter when I froze. Further in, a low moan rose from deep inside the tunnel, undulating with a strange cadence, almost in sync with my own pulse. I stepped back, pressing my palms to the damp walls, trying to steady my breathing. The shadows shifted again, closer now, but I still couldn't see a source. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but the darkness behind me seemed to stretch, swallowing the entrance I had passed. Panic set in, a cold, clenching fear that made my hands shake and my stomach churn. I ran, my boots slipping on wet stones, the scraping following, now joined by a faint, rhythmic thump, like something pacing just out of sight. I twisted through tunnels that shouldn't have existed, bends that curved impossibly, leading me back to spots I recognized, or thought I recognized. The tunnel was alive, it seemed, folding in on itself, testing me, measuring my fear. I tried calling out, voice raw, echo bouncing back in strange, distorted ways. I wasn't calling to anyone, I realized. I was calling to something that might be listening, something waiting in the shadows. My flashlight flickered, throwing elongated shapes across the damp walls. A sense of being watched settled deep in my chest. I stumbled over a rock and went down hard, scraping my knees and hands. The cold seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. When I rose, I moved cautiously, feeling the air shift, the very walls pressing closer. Every turn brought a new shadow, a new scraping, and the moan that rose and fell, whispering my own panic back to me. Time lost all meaning. I couldn't tell how long I had been moving in that twisting maze. My legs were trembling, lungs burning, and yet the pull of curiosity, and perhaps something else, something instinctual and frightening, kept me going. The tunnel seemed endless, a labyrinth carved from cold stone, alive with some quiet, patient awareness. I realized I had no idea where the surface was, no memory of the turns I had taken. I was entirely alone, except for the shadows and the sounds that followed every step. Each echo, each moan, seemed to confirm that I was not the first to walk these stones, that this place held history, quiet, patient, and hungry. At one bend, I thought I saw movement beyond the beam of my flashlight, a shape, indistinct, shifting just at the edge of sight. My stomach clenched. I froze, listening. The scraping stopped for a moment, replaced by silence, thick and heavy, and then resumed, closer, almost beside me. The figure, or whatever it was, did not step into the light. It did not speak. It simply waited, patient, deliberate, aware of every heartbeat and tremor of fear. I forced myself to keep moving, forcing one foot in front of the other, though every instinct screamed to turn and flee. The shadows twisted as I passed, crawling over walls, pooling in corners, as though the tunnel itself had a consciousness, shaping the dark, directing the fear. Eventually, I stumbled into a stretch that felt familiar, a wall that I thought I had passed earlier. Relief surged briefly, but then it passed as the twisting paths repeated themselves, bending impossibly, leading me in circles. I realized the tunnel didn't just conceal me, it toyed with me. Each step I took seemed preordained, measured, as if my panic were a plaything. My voice, when I tried to call out again, sounded wrong to me in the echoing dark. Each syllable bounced back, warped, mocking. I wanted to scream, but no sound would leave my throat without distortion. I fell to my knees at one point, pressing my hands to my ears, whispering desperate pleas to the empty stone, hoping for some answer, some guidance. The only answer came in the rhythm of the moans and scraping that had become my constant companions. When I finally emerged, or thought I did, into the faint daylight filtering through the pines, I collapsed onto the leaf-strewn ground, trembling uncontrollably. My clothes were torn, boots scuffed and wet, hands raw. I stared at the entrance behind me, heart hammering, convinced for a moment that it might close or vanish if I looked away. But it didn't. It sat there quietly, innocuous, the way it had seemed when I first approached. Yet I knew that something remained in the dark, patient and waiting. That tunnel hadn't released me. I had escaped, yes, but only partially. The air of it, the shadows, the deliberate movements, they stayed with me in my chest, in the hollow ache behind my eyes, in the tremor of my hands. Even now, days later, I feel the pull when I pass the ridge, that subtle tug in my chest, a quiet reminder of the darkness I brushed up against. I dream of the scraping and moaning, of shadows that move with intent just beyond my peripheral vision, of the weight of a place that measures fear and waits patiently for the next unwary soul. I know I will never go back, but a part of me, a small, foolish part, remembers the call of that tunnel, the quiet, predatory patience that felt alive, aware, and unyielding. Something is still down there, and I can feel it watching, knowing, waiting, and I wonder whether it will ever truly let me go, or whether the shadows will continue to haunt me for the rest of my life, until the line between memory and presence dissolves into the dark. Story 3. The Feral Breath of Darkness. I had always thought caves were just stone and shadows, empty spaces waiting for someone to walk through. I went alone that afternoon, hiking along a little-known trail in the Blue Ridge, drawn by curiosity more than caution. The entrance was narrow, tucked beneath a ridge where roots and moss tangled like the hands of something old and patient. I crouched to slip inside, flashlight in hand, thinking it would be a quick exploration. The air immediately changed, thick and heavy, smelling of wet stone and something else, something sharp and sour that made my stomach twist. I breathed it in, telling myself it was just the smell of decay, of old water stagnating in the rocks, and stepped further into the dark. At first, it was uneventful. My flashlight flickered across the damp walls, casting long, trembling shadows that shifted with every movement. I had taken perhaps 10 steps when I felt it, a sudden, hot breath on the back of my neck, heavy and fetid, wet in a way that no wind or animal could explain. I spun around, heart hammering, expecting to see some creature, a raccoon maybe, or a bat flitting in the darkness, but there was nothing. The shadows remained still, yet alive, twitching just beyond the reach of my light. A scraping sound began above me, slow and deliberate, like claws moving across stone. I froze, breath hitching, flashlight shaking in my grip. The sound circled, scraping again, closer now, as if someone, or something, was following me, watching my every move. My instinct screamed to turn back, but I had already gone too far in. Each step I took echoed in the hollow chamber, yet every footfall seemed mirrored. I would step, and a soft, wet sound answered behind me, just out of sight. I could not see it, could not trace it, but the sensation of being hunted pressed in on me from every direction. Panic began to rise, a crawling heat through my chest, making it hard to breathe. I called out, voice trembling, but the only reply was the distorted echo of my own words bouncing off the stone. The scraping continued, measured, patient, circling above and behind me, never revealing itself, yet impossibly close. The darkness felt alive, aware of my fear, feeding on it. I tried to move faster, shuffling across slick rock floors, hands gripping the walls for balance. My flashlight flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to twitch independently, slinking across the walls in ways that no light should allow. The hot breath returned, lingering behind me, brushing my shoulders as though a wet hand had passed over my skin. I spun again, eyes wide, stomach churning with nausea and terror, but again, nothing. Only the scraping, circling and deliberate, and the damp, oppressive air pressing against me like a weight. My lungs burned as I scrambled forward, claws of stone cutting into my hands as I grabbed rocks for leverage, trying to climb over fallen boulders and slick patches of mud. Each movement was mirrored, each step echoed by that unseen presence. I could hear it pacing, following, yet invisible. Every instinct I had told me to run blindly, to escape, but the cave's layout betrayed me. Corridors twisted impossibly, passages narrowed and widened unpredictably, as if the earth itself were bending around me, trapping me. My flashlight finally fell to the ground at one point, and I crawled on hands and knees, scraping, bruised, bleeding, guided only by memory and the hot, fetid presence that seemed to stalk me. Hours, or maybe only minutes, passed, time dissolving into fear. The chamber opened into a slightly wider room, and I felt the breath again. Close enough to make the back of my neck tingle, wet and warm, carrying that unmistakable inhuman scent. I did not look. I dared not. My hands were raw, clothes torn and damp with sweat and dirt, but somehow I forced myself onward. The scraping continued, slow, deliberate, patient, circling the chamber and following my every attempt to escape. It was not fast, not hurried. It had no need for speed. It waited, always patient, always present, feeding on the terror I carried. Finally, I clawed my way toward what I thought was the entrance, rocks tearing at my palms, lungs burning with every shuddering breath. The sunlight filtering through the moss and roots above felt impossibly distant, a faint promise I could barely reach. My legs gave out at the mouth of the cave, and I collapsed onto the forest floor, shaking uncontrollably, chest heaving. Dirt and blood smeared across my hands and knees, and my clothes were torn and soaked with sweat. The cave behind me was quiet now, deceptively calm, but I knew the presence had not gone. I could feel it lingering, patient, watching, still aware of me, even outside the darkness. Even now, long after that day, I feel the memory of that breath on my neck, hot, wet, inhuman, creeping back into my chest during quiet moments. I dream of the scraping on the stone above me, the twitching shadows that were never quite shadows, and the mirrored steps that followed every move I made. I've never returned to that place, and I never will, but the memory has never left me. It sits behind my ribs, a quiet, patient weight, and sometimes, when the wind shifts just right among the pines, I swear I can feel it again, brushing past my shoulder, just as it did that day, waiting for me to come back into the dark. Story 4. Murmurs from the Stalactite Hall. I had been mapping a section of cave that locals called the Hall, a name that spoke of reverence, or maybe fear, for the towering stalactites that hung from the ceiling like frozen curtains. The first time I entered, I was struck by the sheer scale of it. My flashlight cut through the darkness in a narrow cone, illuminating the long, jagged formations and the way the shadows draped across the walls, twisting into impossible shapes. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile formations, listening to the echo of dripping water and the soft scrape of my boots on the stone floor. At first, it was awe-inspiring, the kind of quiet wonder that makes you forget the time and the cold pressing against your skin. But that awe didn't last long. As I ventured deeper, I began to hear something else. Soft murmurs, almost beneath my hearing, like voices carried through thick stone. At first, I told myself it was the echo of my own movements, or maybe water dripping from above, but the murmurs didn't match my pace or direction. They shifted, moving around me, always coming from a slightly different angle, whispering words I couldn't understand. My heartbeat quickened, and a shiver ran down my spine. I forced myself to take notes, to focus on the mapping, but the voices were insistent, never stopping, like the cave itself was alive and speaking to me. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw shapes forming in the rock, faces twisted in silent screams, frozen in angles that shouldn't exist. My stomach churned, and I had to lean against a stalagmite to keep from collapsing. My hands trembled, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. I reminded myself that it was just my mind, straining in the darkness. But a part of me knew better. I could feel the weight of the cave pressing in, heavy and patient, and the whispers didn't relent. Then I heard it, a child crying, faint and distant. My head snapped toward the sound, but the path behind me was empty. I called out, voice shaking, but the cry didn't answer me. It only persisted, echoing from deeper in the hall, layered over the murmurs that seemed to rise and fall in rhythm with my own pulse. Fear surged through me, and I stumbled forward, following the sound of my own footsteps more than any rational path through the cave. My flashlight danced over the stalactites and stalagmites, each shadow twisting like a living thing, each echo amplifying the unease building in my chest. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was an animal trapped, or maybe water moving through a small passage, but the crying was unmistakably human. My fingers scraped along the walls, slick with condensation, as I pushed myself onward, every step echoing unnaturally in the vastness of the hall. I felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone, and every instinct I had told me to turn and leave immediately. But my body betrayed me, moving forward, drawn toward the impossible, unreachable source of the sound. The murmurs shifted again, circling me, layering over the child's cry, and I felt my sense of direction unravel. The paths I had just walked seemed unfamiliar, the angles distorted as if the cave had shifted while I wasn't looking. Shadows seemed to twitch with purpose, slinking along the walls and ceiling just outside the reach of my light. Panic rose in my chest, thick and suffocating. I stumbled over a jagged rock, cutting my hands, but I kept moving, driven by a combination of fear and the need to escape what I could feel but not see. The cries faded, replaced by a strange silence that pressed against my ears. My flashlight flickered one last time before stabilizing, and I caught a glimpse of something at the far end of the chamber. A shadow that wasn't quite a shadow, moving with intention, watching me. My stomach turned and I forced myself to turn away, keeping my eyes on the ground and the walls, taking careful, shuffling steps toward the lighter section of the tunnel I thought led to the exit. The hall seemed endless, but eventually I stumbled into fading daylight filtering through a narrow opening, muscles trembling, heart hammering. I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping, trying to push the weight of the hall off my chest. My hands were scraped and raw, my clothes wet with sweat, mud, and the moisture that clung to the cave's walls. The sunlight was weak, failing to burn away the chill that had settled into my bones. I didn't look back at the entrance. I didn't need to. I knew the whispers hadn't stopped. They lingered in my chest, in the air around me, in my ears whenever I closed my eyes. The hall stayed behind me, quiet now, but patient, waiting, a presence that had followed me from the moment I stepped under its roof, and that I knew would follow me long after I had left. Even now, when I walk through the Blue Ridge and the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear it again. The faint murmurs rising from hidden places, the soft, distant cries, the echo of footsteps that weren't mine. I will never enter that hall again. And I've told no one the full story, because even recounting it makes the shadows seem closer, the voices nearer, the sense of being watched unbearable. The memory of that place lingers, a weight that I cannot shake, a reminder that some parts of the mountains are not empty, and that the stone itself can hold secrets that are patient, alive, and waiting for anyone foolish enough to follow the sound of a whisper into the dark. Story 5. Crawling sounds in the limestone depths. I remember the day clearly, though I wish I didn't. I'd been driving along the winding back roads of the Appalachians, the kind that disappear into the trees and don't reappear for miles. The limestone outcrop I had in mind had been pointed out to me by a local who claimed there were some old tunnels worth poking into. I didn't expect much, just another narrow cave to add to the notes in my journal. But when I saw the entrance, I felt that old, familiar thrill, a mixture of curiosity and fear. It was narrow, barely wider than a doorway, the limestone walls jagged and mottled with damp stains, and the forest around it silent in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I parked the truck on a bed of moss, checked my flashlight, and slid through the opening, feeling immediately the oppressive weight of the rock above and around me. It was like stepping into a throat of the earth, all cold stone and faint dripping water. The smell hit me first, musty and mineral heavy, something damp and rotten lurking underneath that reminded me of a cellar I'd been in as a child. My boots scraped against the uneven floor, and the beam of my flashlight jittered across the walls, illuminating nothing but shadows and jagged rock. At first, it was silent. The only sound was my own breathing, echoing back at me like a chorus of some long-forgotten miners. I took careful steps, running my fingers along the rough limestone, trying to map the bends and turns as I went. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, I heard it. A soft, wet, crawling sound, almost like fingernails dragging through mud. I froze, straining my ears, trying to convince myself it was an animal, a rat, a salamander, something natural, but it wasn't. The sound moved with me. Every step I took seemed to bring it closer, or maybe it was mirrored, matching my pace exactly. When I paused, it paused. My heart started hammering in a way that made my ears ring, but I forced myself to keep moving to see if I could reach the larger chamber I had read about in the notes. The tunnels twisted and turned tighter than I had imagined, and soon I was scraping along walls with both hands, pulling myself over slick rock. The sound followed relentlessly, never changing, just that wet, soft scuttle, always somewhere just beyond my flashlight's reach. It was impossible to see anything, yet the feeling that something was there pressed down on me heavier than the limestone itself. Every time I glanced into the shadows, my light caught brief, slithering shapes that dissolved into nothing. I told myself it was the walls, the play of light, anything to keep the panic at bay, but deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever it was aware of me, and it was moving along with me. At one point, the tunnel narrowed to a crawl space. My stomach dropped into my boots as I realized I couldn't stand upright. My flashlight's beam bounced across the walls, and I noticed the surface slick, like mud had been smeared over the rock for centuries. That's when I heard it most clearly, directly behind me. The sound of something wet, sliding, crawling, shifting across the stone. My skin erupted in goosebumps, and I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I held my breath, trying to listen. The sound stopped when I froze, like it knew my fear, like it was feeding on it. When I moved again, the crawling resumed, creeping closer, echoing around the tunnels in a rhythm that was all too deliberate. My rational mind screamed at me to turn around, to shine the flashlight back, but I didn't. I couldn't see anything. I could only feel it behind me, moving in tandem with me, as though the darkness itself had a pulse and I had stepped inside it. Panic finally overcame reason. I scrambled forward, slipping on the muddy floor, clawing at rock outcroppings to keep from falling, my hands scraping against stone until they bled. The beam of my flashlight shook wildly as I darted through the narrowing tunnels, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. I kept hearing the crawl, now faster, wet, and relentless. 1,000 tiny feet dragging over stone, always behind, always following. And sometimes, in the corners of my mind, I thought I caught whispers, soft, unintelligible, like a voice trying to speak through thick water. My breathing came in ragged gasps, and I felt my stomach churn as I realized how trapped I was. This wasn't a cave I could explore. This was a labyrinth with a presence I could not understand and could not escape. At one point, I slipped and landed hard against the rock. Pain shot through my side, but I didn't stop. The crawling was so close now that I could feel it in the vibrations of the stone beneath my palms. I glanced behind against every instinct, and my light caught something, just a movement, a shadow that stretched and slithered along the walls. I blinked, and it was gone. My mind tried to rationalize it again, trick of the light, fatigue, hallucination. But the terror that gripped me was unmistakable. Something had been moving with me from the moment I entered, unseen but palpable, tracking my every step. Finally, I saw it, the faint daylight spilling through the cave's mouth, pale and merciful. I lunged toward it, hands raw from clawing the stone, knees slick with mud, lungs burning with every ragged breath. The sound of crawling was still there, but in that moment, hope surged. I could escape. I tumbled out into the forest, scraping against roots and rocks, tripping over fallen logs, until the cave's shadow was behind me. Only when I reached the flat clearing, chest heaving, skin slick with sweat and blood, did I realize the sound hadn't fully left me. It echoed in my ears, inside my head, a rhythm that would not stop, the wet scuttling of something that had touched me, had marked me somehow, and refused to let go. I haven't returned to the limestone cave since that day, and I don't think I ever will. Even now, months later, when I close my eyes in the quiet of my apartment, I can hear it. Soft, wet, crawling just beyond the edges of my vision, moving in perfect harmony with my own heartbeat. I can't explain it, and I don't try. All I know is that the limestone tunnels are alive in some way I cannot understand, and whatever followed me that day remains. Just outside sight, just outside reason. Sometimes I wake in the night, trembling, convinced I feel a presence in the room with me, and I know it's the same sound, the same rhythm, always waiting, always crawling, and always patient. Even in daylight, even among people, there's a part of me that flinches at wet rustling, at the way shadows shift just slightly against the walls. I tell myself it's nerves, imagination, the echo of my own fear. But I know better. The caves are full of things that don't belong to the light, that move in silence, that track and wait. I hear the memory of it in every hollow sound, every scrape and shuffle in the underbrush when I walk in the woods. I can't explain why it followed me, why it didn't stop at the cave's mouth. And I don't think I want to. The thought that it might still be there, somewhere in the limestone depths, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter, is enough to keep me from ever going back. Sometimes I wonder if I was lucky to get out at all, or if I simply ran long enough for it to lose interest. But there's a part of me that knows the truth. There is no losing it, no escaping the crawl of the darkness. The memory clings like a second skin, damp and cold and alive, and in quiet moments, I can still feel the vibration of its movement beneath my feet, under my hands, as though it's still with me. I cannot say it is human, or animal, or anything that belongs in this world. I can only say that I know it exists, and I know the cave gave it to me, and that it waits, always waiting for the next sound, the next step, the next heartbeat to follow. I've tried to tell people, but no one understands. They say caves have echoes, that the mind plays tricks when you're alone in the dark. But I remember every detail too clearly. The slick mud, the scraping against stone, the smell, the heat of the crawl close behind me, and the way it mirrored my movements perfectly. I remember thinking I could outpace it, lose it in the labyrinth of limestone, but it never faltered. It was patient, relentless, like the earth itself had taken a breath and followed me. Even now, I can't walk past a hollow in the ground, a small opening in the rocks without pausing, heart hammering, listening for that wet, crawling presence that I cannot see but I know is there. I will never enter another cave. I will never walk into the limestone depths again, and yet I can't stop hearing it, not in dreams, not in the quiet hours before dawn. It has imprinted itself on me, a memory that is alive and moving, something that I cannot reason away, and perhaps that is the real horror, that I was never alone, even when I thought I was, that the darkness has patience, persistence, and a way of following long after you have fled. The sound, the crawl, the wet, insistent motion, it is with me still, waiting for the next step, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of entering. Story 6. The Lantern That Flickered Alone. I remember the first time I brought the old lantern down into the cavern, a place the locals barely talked about, whispering warnings about twisted passages and echoes that weren't echoes at all. The mouth of the cave yawned wide, but as I stepped inside, the walls seemed to lean closer, like they were watching, pressing in under their own weight. My boots echoed across the stone floor in a rhythm that felt too loud, too sharp, and I tried to tell myself it was just the cave responding, that it had nothing to do with me. I carried the lantern carefully, its flame dancing lazily, throwing warm orange glimmers over the jagged rocks. At first, it was beautiful. The cavern opened into a wide space, a natural hall that felt almost cathedral-like, with stalagmites rising like broken pillars and the ceiling draped in shadowed lace. I raised my camera, eager to capture the scale, and for a moment I forgot myself. Then it started, just a flicker. At first I blamed the lantern, a draft sneaking in from somewhere far off. But when the air stood utterly still, when the wind failed to stir even a hair on my neck, the flicker took on a rhythm that felt deliberate, like the light itself was hesitant, warning me. Shadows on the walls began to twist in ways that made my stomach knot. It wasn't just darkness bending across the rock, it was shapes, fleeting, unnatural, moving with intent. I tried to convince myself I was seeing tricks, the mind playing games with light and texture. I told myself I'd been underground too long, and that my eyes were adjusting too slowly. Yet each time I moved the lantern, each time I looked away, the flickering intensified, and something seemed to shift just beyond the glow. Something that didn't belong to the stone. I turned toward the path back, thinking the exit was close. But the cave had changed. I swear it wasn't there before. The corridor I'd entered from now twisted like a river of stone, unfamiliar and wrong. Panic pooled in my stomach as the lantern flared violently, forcing me to drop it briefly, its light stabbing the walls in sudden bursts. And that's when I saw them. Figures, faint but unmistakable, just beyond the edges of the beam. They weren't human exactly, at least not fully, but they stood there, watching. And every instinct screamed at me to run. The shadows of their forms stretched long and distorted, merging with the stalagmites and ceiling drips. And for a moment, I thought the cave itself had grown limbs. I scrambled backward, catching the flickering light again in my hand, and ran blindly. The cavern seemed endless, corridors folding over themselves, passages I didn't recognize twisting around corners that should have led me out. Every time I paused, terrified to take another step, the lantern sputtered and flared, revealing glimpses of those same figures, their silent presence pressing in around me. I stumbled over a slick patch of rock, scraping my knees, and the lantern nearly went out. My heart was thundering so hard I could hear it over the faint, wet sounds of the cave itself, the air thick with the scent of stone and damp. I didn't want to look back, but I couldn't stop myself. And each time I did, the figures were closer, shifting silently in the edges of the light, never stepping fully into it, yet undeniably there. I screamed once, a short, harsh sound that echoed back at me from a dozen walls. No answer came, not from the figures, not from anyone, nothing but the cavern itself. It was mocking, patient, indifferent. I ran, slipping and skidding over mud and loose rock, arms outstretched, blindly following the memory of the path I thought led to the mouth. But the cavern had no mercy, folding, twisting, moving in a way that made every step uncertain. Finally, after what felt like hours, though it may have been minutes, I burst through a narrow gap and into the dim light of the late afternoon. The lantern was weak now, its flame low, flickering, almost dying. Outside, the forest was still and quiet. The kind of quiet that presses down like a blanket, yet nothing could erase the image of what I'd seen. The figures had not moved when I left, but I know they were there, somewhere just out of reach, in that twisting hall of stone that refuses to stay the same. I set the lantern down, and the flame guttered one last time before extinguishing completely. Even now, weeks later, I can't think about that cavern without a tight, cold knot in my chest. I remember the flares of the light, the shapes in the shadows, the way the walls seemed to breathe, folding and stretching as if alive. I avoid caves now, any narrow opening into the earth, because I know the lantern will light the way only to show me what waits beyond the edge of understanding, and I'll hear the soft scrape of something moving just out of sight. The forest and mountains are safe, for the most part, but in the deep stone, the twisted halls remain, waiting for the next person foolish enough to trust their eyes in the dark. Even talking about it now makes my hands shake, remembering how small and foolish I felt in that vast, silent place that wasn't silent at all. The lantern may be gone, but the images, the feeling of being watched, the sense that the stone itself has intent, they linger. They follow me whenever I close my eyes, and I know that somewhere in those caverns, waiting just beyond the light, the flickering will continue. Story 7. Footsteps in the hidden chamber. I remember the first time I heard about the chamber from old Tom Hensley, who swore no man had set foot there and returned unshaken. He spoke of it as though it were alive, like some ancient beast lurking just beyond the rim of reason, and he warned me to leave well enough alone. Naturally, I didn't. There's something about the Appalachians that calls to you if you've spent any time in their woods, a kind of ache in your chest that says go further, dig deeper, see what they hide. That day, the sky had pressed down low and grey, the kind of morning that makes the mist cling to every ridge and tree like it's holding its breath. I parked the truck at the trailhead, the tires crunching over gravel, and pulled on my boots, shoving my pack higher onto my shoulders. I knew the stories, caves that swallowed men, hollows where people vanished, whispers that followed you home. I tried to tell myself it was just superstition, but a small knot of fear had already settled behind my ribs. The trail led me down through thick brush, the kind that scrapes your arms raw if you're not careful, and I kept my eyes on the rock formations up ahead, massive sheets of limestone rising like teeth from the forest floor. Tom had drawn me a crude map, enough to locate the fissure he called the hidden chamber, though he insisted the path shifted when you weren't looking. I laughed it off as one of his old man jokes at first, but as the trees thinned and the rock walls grew taller, I felt an unfamiliar pressure in the air, a heaviness that made each step feel deliberate, like the earth was waiting for me to make a mistake. My flashlight bounced along the walls, catching wet streaks where water had dripped, turning the stone into slick, silver ribbons. The sound of my boots echoed unnaturally, long and hollow, until I caught myself listening too hard, expecting, hoping not to hear anything else. Then I found it. The fissure was narrower than I imagined, barely wide enough to squeeze my shoulders through, and the rock on either side rose in jagged teeth. My fingers traced the stone as I pressed onward, feeling the damp, cold surface like the skin of something old and unwelcoming. The air inside was different, stagnant and heavy with mineral scent, and I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in my chest. That's when I heard it. A footstep. Slow, purposeful, not mine. I froze, the flashlight shaking in my grip, and for a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks. But the sound came again, deliberate and steady, pacing the edges of the narrow tunnel I had just entered. My heart slammed against my ribs as I whispered, "Hello?" But the only response was the echo of my own voice, bouncing back like it was mocking me. I forced myself forward, step by trembling step, telling myself it had to be someone else, another explorer, or maybe an animal. But the footfalls were human, too measured, too familiar in rhythm. I could feel them circling, slowing when I slowed, quickening when I moved. The walls seemed to stretch, the shadows lengthening into shapes that hovered just out of reach, though I could see nothing in the beam of my flashlight. My stomach churned, the fear now a living thing inside me, crawling and twisting with every heartbeat. I tried to call out again, louder this time, but the sound that came out of my own mouth sounded alien, as if the cave itself had swallowed my words and spat them back, broken. The tunnel opened suddenly into a dome-like chamber, the ceiling rising impossibly high, draped with mineral growths that glittered like dark chandeliers in my flashlight's beam. The air here was cooler, and the echoes were magnified, every tiny noise bouncing in a pattern that made it impossible to tell where sound originated. And then the footsteps came closer. I could feel them now, not just hear them, an awareness in the air, a rhythm that moved around me as though invisible feet circled the perimeter, tracing the dome in slow, deliberate steps. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and saw only the slick stone walls and jagged stalagmites rising from the floor like frozen sentinels. The footsteps paused. I held my breath, and then they began again, quicker this time, like a predator toying with its prey. I started moving, not forward, not back, just in a half-crouched, awkward shuffle, trying to keep my balance on the slick floor. Each movement was mirrored by the footfalls, quickening as I quickened, slowing when I slowed. I tripped over a protruding rock and hit the ground hard, scraping my palms and knees, and for a moment I wanted to scream, but the sound of my own voice was swallowed immediately, replaced by a low, persistent hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It wasn't a word, not even a whisper, but it was alive, vibrating through my bones. I scrambled upright, chest heaving, and began to run blindly toward what I hoped was the exit, the light of my flashlight swinging wildly, catching glimpses of walls that seemed to lean in toward me. Panic blurred my sense of direction. Every tunnel I thought I recognized shifted, twisting in ways that made no sense. I ran past formations that I could swear weren't there before, stalactites forming columns like fingers reaching down, shadows moving where shadows had no right to move. I could hear the footfalls everywhere now, faster, more insistent, circling above, below, and behind me in a rhythm that my mind could not comprehend. The walls themselves seemed alive, narrowing and opening, as though the cave was reshaping itself around me. The smell of damp earth and something fouler, decay, rot, something organic, filled my nostrils, making my stomach heave. I stumbled over a low ledge and slid into a shallow pool of water, freezing when the flashlight flickered and illuminated what looked like handprints pressed into the mud. They were small, childlike, but I had seen no one. My hands trembled, reaching for the rock to pull myself up, and that's when I heard it. A soft whimper, almost imperceptible, like a child crying from just beyond the edge of hearing. I spun in every direction, flashlight shaking, but the dome revealed nothing. The sound came again, faint and fleeting, and then disappeared entirely. I ran, any sense of orientation gone, driven purely by fear, tripping over jagged rock, scraping my legs, the flashlight beam cutting wild arcs in the darkness. The footfalls followed relentlessly, not behind, not ahead, but everywhere, circling in a maddening, constant rhythm. Time collapsed. Seconds stretched into minutes, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell. I tripped again, catching myself on a stalagmite, feeling the slick water under my palms, tasting the metallic tang of blood where I'd scraped my knuckles. The air was thick now, heavy and close, pressing against my chest, constricting my lungs. Every breath came with the echo of those footsteps, quickening, slowing, mocking me with their invisible presence. I tried to scream, to shout for help, but the sound dissolved into the damp stone around me. My mind reeled. I wanted to stop, to face whatever was here, to understand it, but my body refused, driven only by the raw animal instinct to survive. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, I saw the faint glow of daylight. A fractured slit through the rock that led upward. I lunged toward it, hands tearing at stone and dirt, knees slipping in the mud until I burst through the opening, sunlight blinding me, wind cutting across my face. I didn't stop running until the forest floor was under my boots, until I had fallen to the ground, chest heaving, sweat and blood mingling on my skin. The cave lay behind me, silent now, seemingly dormant, its entrance just a dark fissure in the limestone, no hint of the horrors within. But I knew the footsteps hadn't stopped. Even as I stumbled back to my truck, shaking, trembling, every small sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, made my heart leap and made me hear the slow, deliberate pacing echoing in my mind. I haven't gone near that hollow since. I haven't even told many people. Friends laugh it off, call it nerves or imagination, but I know what I felt. I know the rhythm, the circling steps that tracked me, that might still be tracking me, somewhere in that dome, pacing the edges, waiting. Some nights I wake, thinking I hear them in my house, pacing just beyond my bedroom walls. And I wonder, with a chill that sinks to my core, if they ever stop, or if somewhere just out of sight, something is always following, always circling, always waiting. It isn't just the cave, I realize later. It's the sound that stays with you, the echo you can't shake. I've walked miles from that place, yet sometimes when I sit alone, it comes back. Footsteps slow and deliberate, pacing the edges of my vision, circling the dome of my mind. I know there's no one there, that it's impossible, but I feel it anyway. The presence, the quiet menace, a reminder that isolation is a dangerous thing, and curiosity is more dangerous still. Some places are meant to stay hidden, some legends carry truth, and some caves remember every intruder, marking them, following them long after they leave. I've never gone back, and I never will, but the sound, the relentless circling sound, remains. I hear it in every hollow of the Appalachians, in the rustle of leaves, the groan of wind across the ridge. And sometimes, when I'm alone and still, I swear I can hear it pacing just behind me, counting my mistakes, reminding me that the chamber is always there, waiting,